In the village of Obeid, silence was sacred. It wrapped around every home like a woven mat, pressed itself into the creaking clay walls, and echoed in the steady rhythm of unspoken understanding. Children were taught not to speak unless spoken to, women to lower their voices in the presence of men, and men to keep their words guarded unless behind closed doors. The elders claimed silence preserved the peace, and peace was more valuable than truth. But from the moment Lami could form words, she broke that peace. She was born under a cloudless sky after a long drought, a rare birth unmarred by storms or screams. The midwife said the baby emerged with her eyes wide open and her lungs ready to shout. And shout she did. Not in pain, but in a deep, long wail that made the goats bray and the lanterns flicker. Her mother, Ibe, remembered how every breath the child took felt heavy, as though the air resisted being drawn by one who would not respect its quiet. Still, she cradled the girl, smiled, and whispered the name she had chosen weeks before, Lami, meaning speech in the old tongue. By the age of 3, Lami was mimicking every conversation she heard. She wandered from home to home, parroting things her mother hadn't taught her, snippets of gossip, murmured curses, old sayings long considered impolite. One day she stood at the village square and repeated the village chief's own words from a week prior, word for word, as he'd scolded his secret mistress. It caused a scuffle. The chief denied everything. The mistress wept in shame. Lami only tilted her head and asked, "Why do grown people lie so much?" The elders called her, the echo that chooses its own song. As she grew, her voice gained a strange pull. It wasn't just her boldness or vocabulary. When she spoke, people listened even when they didn't want to. Her words could chill spines, spark fury, bring tears. She asked questions others avoided. Why couldn't girls inherit land? Why must silence be more valued than kindness? Why did Elder Ifa strike his wife when everyone knew but said nothing? The elders called it insolence. Her mother called it dangerous. Ibe was a quiet woman, once full of light before Lami's birth burned it dim. She believed in the old ways, in patience and submission, in letting truth be swallowed if it meant safety. She had learned the cost of speaking long ago. Her own sister had vanished for asking too many questions during a time of political turmoil, and no one dared mention her again. So when Lami's words began drawing attention, Ibe tried everything to quiet her, bribes, beatings, prayers. But nothing dimmed the girl's fire. "You don't understand what they'll do," Ibe warned one night as she scrubbed a stain from Lami's tunic. "Your voice, it calls things. You speak too much." Lami folded her arms. "They lie too much. That's the problem. They are men with power. You are a girl with none. I have my voice. And it will bring fire," Ibe whispered, more afraid of herself for saying it aloud than of the truth behind the words. Still, the whispers began to swell. People in the market watched Lami as she passed, some with curiosity, others with unease. A baker swore his bread burned when she shouted near his stall. A mother said her baby cried for hours after hearing Lami recite an old poem, one supposedly cursed. The girl's words grew bolder, not out of rebellion, but because she saw no reason to pretend. She knew when people lied. She saw it in the twitch of their mouths, the dullness in their eyes. Lami began calling lies out like weeds, not to shame people but to clear the ground for something better. At 13, she spoke during a community gathering, a sacred silence when no one but the head elder was meant to utter a word. Elder Ifa had just begun his speech on tradition when Lami, without warning, stood and said, "You don't get to speak about tradition. You beat your wife. You steal grain from the offering bowl. And you lied about the famine. We have food, you just hide it." The crowd gasped. Some covered their mouths. The elder's face turned to stone. Ibe tried to pull Lami away, but the girl stood firm. "If no one tells the truth, what's the point of silence?" That night, 2 elders came to their door. "Your daughter is no longer a child," one of them said. "She threatens the balance of this village." "She is cursed," the other murmured. "Her voice is not hers alone. It calls to other things." Lami sat silently in the corner, watching, not afraid but burning with anger. After they left, Ibe fell to the ground and wept. "They will come for you. You don't understand. They've done it before. To others like you." "Then they should be afraid," Lami replied. But the village was done being afraid. They were ready to act. Whispers turned to rumors. Rumors turned to warnings. They said Lami's voice made animals go wild. That she could summon fire from her breath. That she once spoke a boy into madness. Some believed. Some didn't. But the fear was enough. One morning, a boy tripped in the fields and broke his arm. His mother claimed Lami cursed him after he mocked her. That same week, a well dried unexpectedly. A man accused Lami of looking at it too long. Her voice, they said, was poison. Fire. Witchcraft. When the council gathered under the flame tree, Lami was summoned. She went willingly, not because she thought she was safe, but because she refused to be afraid. She stood barefoot on the cracked stone, facing a semicircle of old men with eyes like cold mud. "You have disrupted our peace," said the head elder. "You bring shame to your mother. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Lami looked at each man. "If your peace is built on silence and lies, then it deserves to fall." That was the moment it was decided. No formal judgment. Just silence. The next morning she was dragged from her bed. They tied her wrists with old rope and wrapped her in white cloth, the same used for funerals. As they marched her through the village square, people turned their faces away. Even those who once nodded to her, even those she had defended. Her mother was nowhere to be seen. Some claimed she had fainted. Others said she was forced to stay behind. At the stake they bound her tightly. The firewood was stacked neatly. No one looked her in the eyes. But Lami did not cry. She looked to the sky. Then to the faces around her. "You will hear me again," she said. "Even if you burn my throat." Someone gagged her then. The torch was lit. As the flames caught the dry branches, the wind changed direction. It howled through the square like a warning. The flames leapt high, but not the way fire normally does. They pulsed as if in rhythm with a heartbeat. Lami's scream cut through the air. Not a cry of fear, but of defiance. It rang out like a song no one had taught her, sharp, piercing, unforgettable. And then, just as quickly, silence. But the smoke did not rise like usual. It curled downward into the earth. Her ashes scattered with the dust. Yet as the wind settled, a child whispered to her mother, "I still hear her." In the wind. The mother slapped the child and dragged her away. But the whisper lingered. It settled in the corners of homes. It drifted through the cracks in the doors. In the stillness that followed, the village tried to pretend it had restored order. But in truth they had only kindled the flame they feared most. And far from the square, beneath the roots of the old flame tree, the soil trembled. Just once. As if something had begun to stir. They came for Lami at dawn. It had rained the night before, soft and steady, but now the clouds hung like ash above the village. The silence in the streets was not the usual reverent hush. It was sharp, bristling, afraid. Dogs did not bark. Birds stayed away. Even the wind seemed reluctant to pass through. 2 elders and a guard entered the small hut where Lami slept, her mother's arms loosely around her. Ibi woke first, her eyes darting wide in dread as she saw the figures in the doorway. Before she could move, the guard stepped forward and yanked Lami to her feet. "By order of the council," one elder said flatly. "She is to stand trial at midday." "For what?" Ibi asked, her voice barely above a breath. The other elder's eyes were cold. "Witchcraft. Blasphemy. Disturbing the order." "She's a child," Ibi shouted. "She's only a child." But they had already turned their backs. Lami did not fight. Her wrists were bound roughly and a leather strap was tied around her mouth. As they marched her through the village, villagers peeked from behind curtains and doors, eyes wide and faces pale. Not one stepped forward. Not one spoke. By the time they reached the square, the rumors had already raced ahead. She cursed Elder Ifa. She spoke a demon's name. She made the soil turn sour and the calves be born still. She spoke to birds. She knew things no one told her. Her voice did things. The truth was simpler and worse. 2 nights before, Lami had stood in the square, after hearing weeping from Elder Ifa's compound, and spoken plainly to a gathering of young women. "She is not his servant," Lami had said. "She is his prisoner." The she was a girl barely older than Lami, once promised to a trader's son, but taken instead into Elder Ifa's house as penance, after her father was accused of theft. Her silence was expected. Her obedience demanded. But Lami saw her bruises. She saw the way flinched when her name was called, how she never looked up, never smiled. So Lami spoke. And ran. They found her 2 villages away, barely alive but free enough to speak. What she told the elders in private was damning, but the council denied her words the next day. "She is confused," they said. "Delirious." They burned her clothes and declared her story false. But they did not forgive Lami for starting the fire. And now at the center of the square she stood, 13 years old, barefoot, gagged, her eyes scanning the crowd with defiant calm. They had set up a small platform for the trial. The whole village was expected to attend. A line of elders sat at a long table carved from figwood, robes pressed, faces unreadable. Elder Ifa sat in the middle, looking as if nothing had changed. His hands were folded. His mouth was calm. One elder, younger than the rest, stepped forward. He had once given Lami a mango when she scraped her knee in front of his stall. Today he did not meet her eyes. "Lami," he said, reading from a parchment, "you stand accused of disrupting divine order, of spreading false accusations, of invoking unrest, and of using unnatural speech to bend others to your will." Lami made a muffled noise. She tried to shout, to protest, but the strap over her mouth held firm. "The laws of Obeid do not require physical proof for crimes of this nature," the elder continued. "Intent is enough. And your intent has been seen." The crowd was quiet. Faces were masks, some blank, some tense, some twisted in discomfort. Ibe was held at the edge of the square by two women who whispered prayers and clutched her shoulders as she shook silently. They brought in a bundle of reeds. They brought in a torch. The elder looked once more at Lami. "Is there anything you would say in your defense, had you the voice?" Lami's eyes flared. Her shoulders tensed. But she said nothing, bound and gagged. The elder paused, perhaps waiting for mercy to bloom inside himself, but none came. He nodded. "Then the sentence is death. By fire. Before sundown." Gasps rippled through the square, even among those who expected it. Some murmured prayers. Others looked away. They did not untie her. They dragged her, over stone, through dust, across the memories of the village she once called home, to the far edge of Obeid, where a scorched tree still stood from a long-forgotten lightning storm. There a stake had been prepared. There bundles of dried thorn and twigs lay in a perfect circle. As they tied her to the wood, children watched from the ridge above, their mouths open in horror or awe. No one had been burned in decades. Not since the old wars. Not since a woman had once screamed and cursed a rainless season into flood. Lami's heart beat steady. She met the eyes of those tying her wrists. Her silence was thick, not fearful. It was a silence brimming with words, boiling just beneath the surface. And those binding her knew it. One guard avoided her gaze altogether. Another muttered an apology under his breath. When the sun touched the horizon, Elder Ifa stepped forward, holding the torch. His eyes flicked toward the fig tree. "The fire is the purifier," he said. "Let no wickedness survive its cleansing." He tossed the torch. The thorns caught quickly. Flames rose. And then, nothing went according to plan. The fire flared, and then bent away from her. The flames danced along the ground, circling her, licking at the stake but not touching her skin. A great wind roared up from nowhere. The gathered villagers staggered backward. Lami began to hum. It was a sound no one had heard from her before. A deep, layered vibration muffled by the gag, but somehow clear. It was not words, not yet, but it shook the air. The thorns flared again. Then burst. A scream rose, not hers but someone else's. A woman collapsed. Then a man shouted and pointed at the fire, which had now risen in a column around Lami but had still not consumed her. She stood in a cyclone of flame, eyes shut, her body whole. The leather strap around her mouth snapped. Her voice, long silenced, split the air. "You fear the truth more than death. So you gave me to the fire. But the fire does not fear me." The villagers cried out. Some dropped to their knees. The fire roared higher. And then, with a breath, it vanished. Ash spiraled into the sky. The ropes had turned to dust. But Lami was gone. Only scorched earth remained where she had stood. Only silence. The elders rushed forward. They searched the ashes. They sifted through soot and thorns. No bones. No cloth. Nothing. But on the base of the blackened stake, one thing remained. A handprint. Burned into the wood. Still warm. And far across the hills, miles away, a farmer's wife heard a voice in the wind. It said her husband was keeping a second home. It said her child was not sick but poisoned. She wept. She knew the voice. It was impossible, but she knew. At the edge of Obeid, the fig tree split down the center that night, its bark cracked, its roots steaming. And though the elders tried to erase what had happened, though they burned the trial records, silenced the guards, and warned the villagers that any mention of Lami was punishable, the stories grew louder. She spoke even through fire, some said. The fire bowed to her, said others. Ibie left the village a week later. She walked west toward the mountains, wearing only a shawl and carrying nothing. She didn't speak to anyone. But as she walked, her lips moved constantly. Not in prayer. In whisper. In song. In memory. The girl who spoke too much had been silenced, but only briefly. Now the silence feared her name. They burned her at sunset, but the fire didn't go out by nightfall. Long after the crowd had scattered and the elders declared the judgment complete, the embers continued to glow, angrily, unnaturally, casting strange red shapes across the square. Smoke drifted not upward but sideways, curling toward the homes of those who had cheered. The air stank of charred thorns, burnt cloth and something else, something metallic and alive. They said her scream tore the sky open. They said birds dropped mid-flight. That a child in the hills began bleeding from the nose at the exact moment Lami cried out. No one would speak of it in public. But the whispers began that very night. The fire didn't eat her bones. I saw her lips move after the screaming stopped. My window cracked the moment she died. In the darkest part of the square, where the flames had raged highest, only a faint smear of ash remained. The wooden stake stood half melted, the bottom fused to stone. And at its base, where the fire should have erased all trace, lay two things: a single lock of blackened hair, and a small, smooth stone, unburnt, still warm. The elders ordered the remains cleared before morning. 3 young men from the work caste were chosen. They came with shovels and linen sacks. None of them had spoken to Lami in life, but all 3 moved slowly, with tight jaws and eyes that did not rise to meet the moon. When they reached the center of the square, they hesitated. The air above the ash shimmered. "I'm not touching it," one whispered. "Get on with it," another snapped. But even he trembled as he lowered his shovel. The ash moved on its own. Only slightly, just a drift, but it was enough. All 3 men recoiled. The third, youngest, took a deep breath and plunged his hands into the warmth. It wasn't heat like a hearth or a fire. It was steady, pulsing. Alive. He found fragments, bone too white, cloth too black, pieces of rope like dried veins. They scooped everything into the sacks. They didn't speak again until they reached the edge of the forest. That's where the burial was ordered. No grave markers, no rites, no prayers. "Return her to the dirt," Elder Ifa had said. "Let the land swallow her shame." So they did. But not without seeing. As they lowered the sack into the shallow pit, one of the boys cried out. A coal, still burning impossibly, had been hidden among the ash. It hissed against the soil, refusing to die. "What is this?" the youngest asked. "It's still burning." "How?" None had answers. They buried it anyway quickly and piled stone atop the mound. They did not speak of what they saw, the way the soil smoked for hours, the flicker of something red beneath the stones, the whisper that rose, soft as breath, when the last handful of dirt fell. Back in the village, no mourning was allowed. Iba was taken away before the ashes cooled. They said she was being kept safe from retaliation, but no one ever saw her again. Some said she had been sent to a convent. Others said she walked into the river and never returned. A boy who lived near the prison swore he heard her screaming Lami's name days after the execution, but when he repeated it, he was beaten and made to swallow salt water. The elders passed a decree: no one was to speak the girl's name again. Children were warned. Adults were watched. Anyone caught whispering about the fire would be fined or worse. But still they whispered. It began with a little girl named F. She was 7, the daughter of a weaver. Quiet, easily overlooked. One morning after the burning, she ran to her mother trembling. "Mama," she said, "I saw the fire girl." Her mother hushed her. No, don't say such things." "But I did," F insisted. "She was standing near the thorn tree. Her mouth was moving. You were dreaming." She looked at me. Her eyes were open. They didn't close when she burned. The mother slapped her. Not out of cruelty, but fear. But the dream came again. And then more. A potter saw her in the reflection of his kiln, just for a blink as he pulled clay from the flame. A farmer found a footprint in his field, bare, small, and surrounded by scorched earth. A midwife heard humming in a nursery, the exact lullaby Lami had once sung to the village children. None of them spoke openly. But they told their spouses, their cousins, their closest friends. "She's not gone. She's not quiet. She's still speaking." Then the fires began misbehaving. Hearths would flare suddenly without cause or go cold mid-meal. Lamps flickered and turned red. Smoke carried voices, not words exactly but tones. Moods. Sorrow. Rage. Laughter. One woman claimed her cooking pot burst open and spilled only ash. The elders blamed poor discipline. They told the people to fast more, to pray louder. They blamed the season. They blamed bad coal. But they could not blame her. Not out loud. So they acted harder. Curfews. New patrols. An increase in punishments for dissent. Still the ashes would not settle. At night, in secret, someone placed a white stone near the fig tree. Then another. then a flower, then a braid of black hair. Offerings. No one claimed them. No one removed them. They multiplied. The fig tree, once the place of fire, began to grow again. Its trunk was still split from the burning, but fresh shoots sprouted from the crack. The fruit it bore was blood-colored and sweet as sugar. Children snuck out at night to touch its bark, daring one another to speak the forbidden name, Leone. They said it felt warm under their palms. One night, a group of girls formed a circle around the tree and whispered every injustice they'd endured, from harsh fathers to bruised arms to dreams stolen by cruel teachers. When they were done, a wind rose and circled them once. The next day, one of those teachers left the village without explanation. More stories followed. A boy who mocked a girl's stammer found his voice gone the next morning. It returned, but now he stuttered worse than she ever had. A thief who stole from the widow's stall woke to find his hands blistered as if burned. No one could prove anything. But they knew. They said the ash hadn't scattered, it had spread. In the forest, the grave began to smoke again. It started small, a faint curl rising above the stones, barely visible at dawn. Then the scent returned, burning wood, scorched oil, heat with memory. A hunter passing by saw something that made him fall to his knees. He never said what. He only wept and whispered, "She's watching." It was a month after the burning when the village council gathered in secret. Elder Ifa was pale. He had stopped sleeping. His food arrived untouched. He'd begun hearing voices, so he claimed, always when fire was near. The others told him it was guilt. He insisted it was judgment. "She's still here," he muttered. "She never left." He began digging through old scrolls, looking for ways to rebury the past. Spells, seals, silencing rites. But the scrolls had changed. Some were blank. Others had her name written over every line. They decided to burn the fig tree. They brought oil and torches. The flames wouldn't catch. The tree resisted. The fruit refused to shrivel. And then, when one elder dared cut a branch, his arm blistered with a wound shaped like a mouth. He fled screaming. That night the air turned hot. No fires were lit, yet every house glowed with a dim red light. Children woke crying. Dogs howled. The fig tree hummed. And far beneath the village, in the place where Leone's ashes had been buried, something pulsed once, like a breath. She had been silenced. She had been burned. But her voice had not died. It had only gone underground. It began with the wells. One by one they started to whisper. Not the creaking kind of whisper like old buckets dragged up damp stone, but actual voices, soft, hushed, curling up from the water like breath. The first to hear it was old Mako, who lived at the far edge of the village. He had come for water before sunrise as he always did, and leaned in to listen for the bucket's splash. But what he heard instead made him stumble back. "Mako," the well whispered. "You hid the girl's bread the day before they took her. She wept. And you laughed." He told no one. But that night he dreamt of fire, his bed ablaze, his feet fused to the floor. He awoke screaming, and though his hut was intact, the soles of his feet were blistered and raw. He never went back to the well again. The whispers spread. A midwife heard her name carried by the wind while walking through the mango grove. "You replaced her mother's herbs. You thought it would silence the womb. You were wrong." A hunter heard the trees moaning at dusk. "You lied about the tracks. She never stole from you. But you said she did. You brought the rope." Some refused to listen. They turned their faces away, blocked their ears, prayed louder. But it didn't help. The voices came anyway, through puddles, chimneys, cracks in the walls. They didn't scream. They didn't shout. They simply whispered. And the truth came pouring out. One woman confessed, without meaning to, that she had once wished her own child would vanish, just to win back the affection of her husband. Another, a boy no older than 10, began speaking in his sleep, reciting things he should never have known, who tied the first knot in the rope used on Leone, who spat on the ground when her mother begged for mercy. The people were unraveling, not with blood or violence, but with revelation. Secrets became fragile. Lies dissolved. Even the most sacred rites of silence could not keep the words down. A child was found standing by the schoolhouse wall with ash covering their fingers, a trembling hand stretched over a crude drawing scratched in soot. It was a girl's face, unmistakably Leone's, eyes too bright, lips parted in the shape of a name. When the child opened their mouth to speak, a thin wisp of smoke escaped, and then a scream. Their tongue blistered as if kissed by flame. They survived, but they never spoke again. The elders tried to hide it. They had the wall scrubbed. They punished the child's parents. They said it was a trick of soot and children's fancies. But others had already seen it. And seen what happened next. Every night someone drew the face again. Different hands. Different places. Always the same eyes. In the market stall's back wall. On the chapel's door. Even on the threshold of the council chamber. Lami's image. She was becoming something more than memory. She was becoming prophecy. The town healer lost his mind. He began hearing the whisper inside his own bones. You knew she was right, it told him. But you stayed silent. He tried to drown it out by drinking boiled cactus sap, by stuffing wax into his ears, by fasting until he collapsed. Nothing helped. One night, he walked into the square with a lantern and poured oil on his hands. I didn't speak then, he muttered. So I speak now. He lit the flame. The fire did not burn him. Instead, it spread around him in a perfect circle, not scorching the grass but illuminating it. For a moment he stood inside a golden ring weeping. Then he fell. They buried him quickly. But some saw what had happened and they remembered. The silence was cracking. Not just in mouths and minds but in the structures of the village itself. The chapel's doors wouldn't stay shut. The bell rang at midnight unstruck. The crops on the eastern edge of the fields began to rot. Only there, near where Lami had once stood and defended a girl accused of cursing the land. The elders met in secret. They tried to call it a disease of fear. A wave of panic. A madness that came after executions. They tried to blame the air, the season, a bad harvest. But deep inside they knew. Lami had not been silenced. Her voice had simply learned new ways to travel. Whispers became wind. Wind became words. Words became wounds. A widow named Aluko was found muttering her own sins in her sleep, begging the fig tree to forgive her. I saw the elder touch her, she cried. I said nothing. I thought I'd be safe. When her daughter tried to wake her, Aluko's lips were blistered shut. Not seared. Melted. As though her mouth had been warned. A priest declared it divine silence. But no one believed him. Even he had begun stammering during prayers, forgetting the names of the ancestors. One night, he ran from the chapel and did not return. And still the whispers grew. Children began humming in unison, a tune no one had taught them. Mothers swore it was the melody Lami had sung at the riverbank when she braided their daughter's hair. Fires in homes danced erratically when the song played. The stream outside the village turned warm. Animals grew skittish. And in the forest, where Lami's ashes had been scattered under stone, a strange light began to glow. Only faintly. Only sometimes. But it was there. A shepherd saw it first. Then a herbalist. Then a pair of twins who refused to speak of what they'd seen, only offering a flower afterward laid at the tree's roots. Even the stones in the square had changed. When the wind blew just right, some claimed they heard Lami's name in the cracks beneath their feet. She was not haunting them. She was warning them. She was coming. The most terrifying part wasn't the fear, it was the guilt. The elders could feel it creeping up their necks like vines. Their dreams turned to ash and fire. Their food tasted like charcoal. Some began waking with soot under their fingernails. One elder began to sweat blood. Another, who had tied the first knot of rope, found that his reflection no longer matched his face. They begged the river spirits for protection. They sacrificed goats. They fasted for 7 days. But no silence could undo what they'd tried to bury. And all the while the children whispered the forbidden name, in play, in prayers, in dreams. Lami. The name was alive again. Living in the soil, breathing in the hearths, curled in the breath of every truth unspoken. They had tried to kill her voice. They had made a pyre of fear and lies. But fire does not destroy truth. It reveals it. It scours away the false until only what must be spoken remains. And now the village could not look away. Not from the girl in the soot drawings. Not from the wind that spoke with her breath. Not from the truth that had always burned beneath the surface. The whisper would not die. It had become a chorus. Tanu never stayed in one place too long. He was a healer by practice, a wanderer by nature, and a man bound to the whispering winds that moved between the hills. Wherever the sickness lingered too long, or the crops spoiled in silence, or the night grew heavy with guilt, he arrived. Never summoned, never sent for, but always, somehow, expected. He followed omens. The way birds flew backward before rain, the way flames and lamps flickered without wind, the way dreams clung like wet cloth to those too afraid to speak them aloud. It was a dream that brought him to the hills that night. Not his own, but one left behind in a dying woman's mind. As she passed, her hand curled in his, she had whispered through dry lips, "Where the fire weeps but does not consume, go there. She waits." And so he walked. For 3 nights he moved through the hills, guided only by the restless hum beneath the soil, until just before dawn on the 4th day, he felt warmth rise from the earth under his bare feet. Not sun warmth. This was older, deeper, living. He knelt in the pale grass and brushed aside the soil. At first there was only dirt, then dust, then a thin layer of fine gray ash that shimmered faintly even without light. And then, a sound. A heartbeat. Not his. It was faint, like the soft thud of a drum played deep in a tunnel. But it was there. Rhythmic, constant, alive. He whispered a prayer to no god in particular and began to dig. The ash clung to his fingers. It burned slightly, not enough to wound, but enough to demand reverence. Like holy things do. As he dug deeper, the ash grew warmer, until it almost hissed when touched. But Tanu did not stop. He knew the signs. He had read the sacred text. And he had seen the drawing once, long ago, on the wall of a child's hut in a village that feared its own memory. The face of the girl who burned. The girl who spoke too much. The girl who would not die. Finally, beneath layers of glowing cinders, he found what he did not expect. A shape. No bones. No flesh. But a swirl of ash suspended in air, as if something invisible was breathing, shaping, forming within it. It pulsed when he touched it, a soft, soundless gasp. A voice unspoken. It moved through him not like wind, but like memory. Tanu stood, trembling, and wrapped the ash in a sacred cloth woven from prayer threads and river reeds. He did not try to bind it. He knew better. Some spirits are not to be caged, only carried. He took her to a cave known only to a few firekeepers and spirit healers. The cave had no name, no markings. It was carved not by hands but by heat, a place the earth had once bled open. Inside, the walls shimmered faintly, flecked with old embers tone and the bones of singing birds, long extinct. At the center sat a wide bowl made of black stone, veined with ruby. The speaking bowl. Forged in volcanic fire, it was used only for the oldest of rites, when the dead refused to rest or when the living could no longer bear silence. Tanu placed the ash within it. At first nothing happened. Then the flames lit themselves. Thin lines of fire danced along the rim of the bowl. The ash did not burn. It rose, slowly, delicately, and began to take shape. Not fully human. Not ghost either. Something in between. A shimmer in the form of a girl. A shadow outlined in flame. Her eyes were two coals. Her mouth a breath that never fully left her lungs. She said nothing. But the cave changed. The air thickened. The walls grew warm. The old chants engraved in stone began to hum of their own accord. Tanu knelt. He bowed his head low. He whispered, "You are not gone." The spirit moved, a flicker of heat, a flutter of smoke, and though she did not speak, her presence swept through the chamber like a song only the bones could hear. And then, wordless, formless, a sound. It wasn't music. It wasn't language. It was force. The sound of grief made whole. Of truth burning its way through flesh and fear and forgetting. It poured from the speaking bowl in waves. Tanu's own heartbeat staggered under it. Tears ran from his eyes without shame. He saw. He saw her mother screaming as they gagged her. He saw the elder's face when the rope was tied too tightly. He saw the girl's mouth trying to move in fire. He saw the scream that never had the chance to finish. He saw it now played backwards through time. He fell to his knees and whispered her name, though he had never known it before. Lami. The spirit turned toward him. Her eyes glowed brighter. Around the bowl the cave walls changed. Images scorched themselves into the rock, scenes from her life, her trial, her pyre. 100 hands pointing. One voice rising. Tanu knew what must be done. The spirit's voice had returned, not in speech but in power. In vibration. In memory. But it needed more than one man's heart to carry it. It needed release. He spent 3 days and nights etching fire runes along the cave's entrance, marking paths for the voice to travel. On the 4th night, as the moon rose blood-red over the hills, he placed his hand on the bowl and said the rite. Let the ash rise as word. Let the word rise as flame. Let the flame carry truth. Let truth be heard. The bowl flared. A spiral of smoke shot through the mouth of the cave and up into the night sky, streaking across stars, across silence, into dreams. Across the land people stirred. In their sleep they heard singing. Some wept without knowing why. Children opened their mouths and felt heat curl on their tongues. And in the village where Lami had burned, every hearth flame sputtered, then turned gold. One elder woke screaming. Another died in silence, his mouth wide open, a trickle of soot on his lips. Tanu remained in the cave, watching the flame spirit shift and pulse. She was changing. Becoming. The voice that had once made the wind weep was not dead. It had returned. And now, carried by ash and breath and memory, it would spread. Wherever injustice crouched behind silence, it would speak. Wherever fire had been used to silence the truth, it would burn again, not to destroy but to reveal. Lami, the girl who spoke too much, now spoke through no mouth at all. But everyone would hear her. And no one would be able to pretend they hadn't. Ask ChatGPT. In the weeks that followed the night Tanu spoke the right in the cave, the hills did not sleep. Something shifted in the soil. It began quietly, as most sacred things do. A murmur. A hum beneath the roots. Then a rhythm steady as breath. Then voices. Not loud, not yet, but unmistakable. The first to hear it were the children. They woke from sleep with words on their lips, lullabies they had never learned. Songs carried from nowhere. Each melody filled with notes strange and aching, like the sound of old sorrow wrapped in joy. Parents shook their heads in confusion. Some scolded them. But the songs returned each night, louder than before. And the children sang them while they played, danced, and drew symbols in the dirt they could not explain. Old women listened closely. Some wept. Some closed their shutters in fear. The crops began to sing too. It started with the wheat, their golden heads rustling even when no wind blew. A faint vibration moved through the fields, soft but constant. Farmers stood confused in their rows, ears tilted to the earth. Cornstalks hummed. Vines twisted in patterns like script. When they bent low enough to listen, they heard it. A chant rising from below. Not words exactly, but intention. Repetition. The kind of sound the body understands even if the mind resists. A liturgy buried beneath the furrows of time. It was Lami. She was beneath everything now. Her voice, scattered into ash and carried through the cave's right, had found the root systems. The water veins. The worm tunnels. Her scream had become seed. The elders grew afraid. They called emergency meetings under the guise of tradition. They tried to ban the songs, forbade anyone from speaking Lami's name. They demanded the fields be burned, but every fire they set danced higher and refused to die. Glass began to shatter. Not by hand. Not by storm. By silence. Whenever the elders gathered to chant their ancient prayers of order, the ones used to keep power tight in their palms, a hush would fall so heavy it cracked windows. Ceremonial glass urns exploded in temple corners. Even the sacred bell in the village square shattered when rung, its pieces embedding themselves in the foot of the priest who'd once tied the gag over Lami's mouth. The village was unraveling. But it was not chaos. It was reckoning. And Lami was the threat. By the third week, the birds no longer sang their own tunes. They chirped the first few notes of her melody, then fell silent, as if remembering what had happened to the last voice that rang too clearly. Then on the night of the red moon, Tanu returned. He came cloaked in burlap, walking with a healer's staff and wearing a false name. No one recognized him. He let his beard grow. He let his eyes burn low. But he carried something none could ignore, a sealed jar tucked in a sling across his back. The jar was made of blackened clay, etched in runes of ash script. Within it danced a single flame, small, constant, unnaturally bright. It pulsed to the beat of an ancient song only Tanu could hear. It was not just a flame. It was Lami's heart. Not literally, her body had been taken, burned, and buried. But her essence, the core of her scream, her last breath, her defiance, it had taken root in fire and been preserved. Tanu had coaxed it into containment through sacred chant, not to imprison her, but to protect what remained while she grew. He entered the village like any traveler might. But the soil remembered his steps. And so did the children. They paused in their games when he passed, tilting their heads toward him, sniffing the scent of ash and herbs that trailed him. One girl approached, no more than 5, and placed a flower on the hem of his robe. "She's warm," she whispered. "In your jar." Tanu only nodded. The wind grew restless that night. It howled low against the roofs, and the song in the fields took on new harmony, deeper, richer, almost orchestral. The chants rose through the wells, spiraled down chimneys, made the cattle restless. Even the dogs refused to bark. They just stared at the fig tree. The same fig tree that had once watched a girl burn. Tanu stood before it. He placed the jar at its roots. And waited. Behind him the village stirred. Doors creaked open. Eyes peeked through curtains. The elders gathered in full robes, carrying torches and scrolls, muttering prayers meant to stifle spirit and smother rebellion. They approached him with sneers, with accusations, with the fear of men who know justice has teeth. But Tanu said nothing. The fig tree spoke first. Its branches, once brittle with rot, bloomed. White blossoms opened like mouths. Leaves unfurled like hands. From the bark oozed a sap that shimmered red gold, the color of blood and flame. And then the song rose. Not from below, but from above. Voices, thousands, cascading from the sky like a storm. Not just Lamis but all the silenced. Every girl told to shut up. Every mother whose warning had been mocked. Every child who sang in fear. They poured into the village like rain, like prophecy, like fire that had waited long enough. Tanu lifted the jar. Cracked. Light burst from it, not blinding but illuminating. The fig tree caught fire, but did not burn. And from the light stepped a shape. Not Lami in flesh, but in form. Ash and flame woven into a girl-shaped echo. Her face flickered. Her eyes burned. Her mouth moved, and though no sound emerged, the villagers clutched their chests. They heard her. Inside. She turned to the elders. They fell to their knees, not out of piety but pain. Their tongues turned to coal in their mouths. Every lie they had told surged backward through their teeth. One elder screamed and clawed at his ears as 100 stolen voices screamed through his skull. The fig tree leaned toward Lami's form. Branches wrapped around her gently. And for the first time the ash form smiled. She turned toward the children. Toward the women. Toward the scared ones who had always whispered and never roared. Her light dimmed, not fading but folding inward. The jar resealed itself. The fig tree absorbed it. The chant continued, but softer now. Less frantic. Rooted. Eternal. Tanu bowed low, tears streaking down his face. He had delivered the voice back to its soil. The songs would not stop. They would pass from breath to breath, root to root, daughter to daughter. Beneath the fields. Beneath the shame. The fire had learned to sing. Ask ChatGPT. The quiet festival arrived with all its usual pretenses. White cloths hung from doorways, mouths covered in ribbons of silk, not a word spoken from dawn to dusk. It was the village's most sacred observance, meant to honor peace, reflection, and obedience. No laughter, no song, no cries. Even the children were taught to hush their breath. For generations they had done this without fail. But this year the air felt too heavy to hold silence. Tanu knew it the moment he stepped into the square. He had kept the jar sealed since the night of the fig tree's bloom. It sat wrapped in cloth, slung beneath his coat. He hadn't opened it again. He didn't need to. The heat of it pulsed against his chest, sometimes calmly, other times like a drum of war. Today it burned. He stood in the crowd like any other villager. Eyes down. So. Waiting. At the center of the square, the elders stood in ceremonial robes. Their heads bowed. The high elder clutched a staff topped with a carved tongue, the same staff once raised during Lami's trial. His hand trembled slightly now. The sun was at its peak. The bell did not ring. This too was tradition. But then something cracked. Not stone. Not wood. Blast. The sound rippled across the square, shattering the air's silence. And from beneath Tanu's coat, the sealed jar began to glow. Too late to hide it. Too late to run. The cloth caught fire but did not burn away. It turned to smoke, curling into the shape of letters, of names, of phrases too long buried. The jar split open. And Lami's voice returned. It did not begin with a scream this time. It began with a breath, long, defiant, rising from every throat that had ever been forced to close. Then words. Not shouted but thunderous. You bound my tongue but not my truth. Every head turned. Eyes widened. The elders paled. Lami's voice, more than human now, more than girl, filled the square with a rage older than flame. She spoke names. She told secrets. The crowd gasped as she listed each injustice they had hidden, each betrayal wrapped in prayer. She told of the elder who stole bread from mourning families. Of the priest who touched what was not his. Of the woman who sent her sister to die. She spoke of babies left in the well, of girls silenced with coin and shame, of laws twisted into cages. And she spoke of her death. The gag. The rope. The fire. The silence. The scream. A child began to cry, not from fear but recognition. A mother reached for her daughter's hand. A man knelt and wept openly. One elder broke. He staggered back, shaking his head, and fled toward the edge of the square. She's not real, he shouted, the first voice raised in a festival meant for silence. He never reached the gate. Flames erupted from his back, climbing like hands. He screamed once, not like Lami had, and then he fell, crumbling to ash before he hit the ground. No one moved to help him. The sky began to shift. Not with lightning. Not with smoke. but with color. It turned orange, but not the kind of orange that warned of fire. It was the glow of autumn leaves, of ripened fruit, of embers glowing steady and sure. It pulsed with memory. And still Lami spoke. Her voice moved through the trees, through the soil, through the fig grove. She called to the sleeping truths buried in each villager's chest, and they answered. One by one, people stood and removed their silk ribbons. Some tore them. Some tied them around their wrists instead, not as a sign of silence but of mourning. For Lami. For themselves. For every voice they had smothered, including their own. Tanu stepped forward, hands empty, eyes bright. He did not try to silence her. He let her speak. Because now they were listening. The reckoning had begun. And it sounded like her. Asked ChatGPT. The village had never heard such noise. After centuries of silence wrapped as virtue, the air was now thick with words, sharp, heavy, shaking the dust from the walls and the fear from the hearts that had long been taught to bow. Lami's voice lingered like mist above the square, no longer roaring but steady. Like fire made tame. Like judgment spoken in the tone of truth. She did not appear as a phantom or flame. She did not need to. Her presence was everywhere. In the crackling of torches. In the heat that rose even when the wind blew cold. In the way the stones beneath people's feet seemed to remember what they had stepped over. Those who had once called her cursed now trembled with shame, not because she demanded it, but because the weight of truth had grown too heavy to carry any longer. No one declared a beginning to the trials. They simply began. The first to fall to his knees was Elder Koja. His hands shook as he reached into his robes and pulled out a torn strip of cloth, a child's blanket. I took him, he whispered, because he cried too loud at night. I told his mother he drowned. I watched her grieve and I lied. No one moved. No one spoke. Lami's voice came not from the wind this time, but from the flame at the center of the square. It flared just once. A long strand of fire curled out, slow as breath, and wrapped gently around Koja's wrist. He did not scream. He wept. When the flame vanished, a mark remained, ash-black, shaped like a tongue pressed in silence. The people stared. Lami's voice again. He will carry what he took. Another stepped forward. A woman, older, arms crossed tightly as if to keep her secrets locked inside her ribs. But her mouth began to move without her consent. I cut the girl's braids, she said. I told her hair was for the blessed. I called her dirty. When her mother asked why, I said it was lice. The fire did not move. The mark did not come. Lami's voice was softer now. Fear can make a weapon of anyone. But regret is a form of flame too. Tend it. The woman collapsed, sobbing. More followed. A boy barely into manhood spoke of how he laughed when a girl was mocked for stuttering. A midwife confessed to swapping a newborn girl with a boy to please a grieving father. A merchant admitted to paying for silence with coin and grain. Each confession drew heat from the fire, but not all were punished. The cruel were marked, flame crawling across skin like writing burned into the book of their lives. But the remorseful were spared. Lami's voice never struck in rage. It guided, split only by the clarity of justice, the clean divide between silence chosen and silence forced. And still the villagers came. It was not obligation that drew them, but the relief of release. Words long buried burst forth like roots cracking stone. Secrets rotted less when exposed to light. The trial was not of Lami's making, it was of their own. By dusk, the square was covered in ash and knees. Some people bore marks. Others bore new names, whispered to them in the hush that followed confession. Children watched, wide-eyed but unafraid. They saw what their parents had hidden. They saw what silence had protected. And they saw the cost. At the far end of the square, a young girl stepped forward. Her hands were balled into fists, her face streaked with soot. I have no sins to speak, she said. But I have something to say. The fire flared in approval. Lami wasn't the curse, the girl said, lifting her chin. She was the cure. And we killed her for it. No flame struck her. No judgment followed. Only quiet. And then the sound of the fire, breathing. Lami's voice spoke one last time that night. Not all flames destroy. Some reveal. Some protect. And some remember. The trials ended not with a decree, but with a long, slow wind that cooled the square. The fire remained. But now it was theirs to tend, not to fear. Asked ChatGPT. The fire pit where Lami once stood, bound and condemned, had turned to more than ash. Its scorched stones, once meant to erase her, had instead become her altar. The villagers did not plan the shrine. It rose without decree, without architects. Someone left a ring of wildflowers around the pit. Another placed a carved bowl of river water beside it. A child sat near the edge for hours, humming a tune no one had heard before. Soon the ground was swept clean. Benches appeared. Candles flickered each evening, lit by hands that remembered. By the end of the season they called it the listening flame. It was not a shrine for worship. No gods were named. No prayers were demanded. It was a place for what had once been feared, the voice. People came not to kneel but to speak. Not to recite but to release. Old men came to whisper regrets. Young girls came to sing without shame. Mothers wept for children they'd once silenced. Fathers admitted to things they never dared before, fears, faults, softness. And the flame listened. It never flared, never flickered with anger. But when someone's voice trembled or cracked, the fire grew warm enough to make them close their eyes. Some swore it pulsed with breath. Others claimed they heard words rising from it, soft, not commanding, grieving but calm. Lami's voice was no longer thunder. It was a tide. It was the hush after weeping. It was the warmth left behind after rage has burned out. Children began to gather at the shrine after school. They played nearby but never stepped too close without bowing their heads, not from fear but reverence. They didn't fear the fire. They whispered to it like a friend. One child left a drawing, Lami's face surrounded by flame with a quote scribbled underneath in shaky handwriting. She listened until we could. The council, once ruled by silent nods and stone gazes, now opened meetings with a moment of speech, not silence. Every decision was followed by an open forum. Villagers were encouraged to speak their minds, especially those who had once been shunned for it. The old punishment of quieting, where talkative children were shamed or silenced, was outlawed. Instead, new rituals began. Once a season, everyone gathered in the square and shared a story they had never told before. No one interrupted. No one judged. They called it Ember Night. Even the elders came, though some with trembling hands. They spoke of choices made in fear, of obedience mistaken for righteousness. They did not ask forgiveness, they gave it to themselves aloud. The fire at the shrine never died. Even during rain. Even during wind. It burned small, steady, present, like Lami herself. Tanu, the healer who once found her ashes, became its guardian. He built nothing extravagant, just a simple shelter with open sides so the wind could pass through, and so the voice of Lami would never be trapped again. He didn't speak much about what he had seen. But sometimes, late at night, if you stood beside him and listened closely, you might hear him hum the same tune the child had sung, the one no one remembered teaching her. One evening, a traveler arrived, cloaked and weary, asking what temple this was. "It's not a temple," Tanu said. "It's a memory, a lesson, a flame that listens." The traveler sat before the fire for hours, said nothing, then left a single word behind, carved into the bench. "Thank you." Years passed. The village changed. Not with fanfare, not with force, but with firelight and voice. With children unafraid to speak and adults learning to listen. Silence was no longer law. It was choice. It was peace earned through understanding, not imposed by power. And every now and then, in the hush before dawn, someone would hear a whisper in the flame. A familiar voice. A voice that had once split the sky and now soothed the earth. "I am still listening." The story of Lami did not stay in the village. It traveled. Not on parchment or proclamation, but in songs. Soft ones hummed in kitchens, bold ones shouted in hidden circles, trembling ones passed between girls who had too long held their thoughts in silence. They sang her name in marketplaces, in fields, in dark rooms lit by single candles. Her name was not chained to history. It lived in mouths that dared to speak. In a distant desert town, a girl with a bruised cheek whispered into her pillow, "Lami," before daring to speak up the next day. When her voice cracked, the wind stirred through the schoolroom window, just once, like a breath. Her teacher paused. "Listen. Change." In the mountains beyond the kingdom's edge, shepherd children passed a rhyme between them about the fire girl who told the sky no. They danced around bonfires at night and dared each other to speak forbidden truths. And when they did, they swore the flame shimmered higher. Ballads grew, some with new endings, some sung with tears. In one, Lami returns as a phoenix. In another, she walks the edge of the world, listening to every silenced soul. In a third, she lives inside every girl's first scream, the one they're told to hide, quiet, tame. One traveling bard sang only Lami's songs. Her voice was hoarse, her fingers burned from playing too long, but she said, "If I can sing her story, maybe someone else will speak theirs." The shrine still stood, back in the village where it began. Visitors left candles. Letters. Pieces of cloth with names stitched in shaky thread. They wrote secrets and burned them in the flame, believing the smoke would carry them to her. And sometimes it did. The wind began to answer. Not always with words, sometimes just a shift in direction, a warm gust through cold air, a flicker of flame when no spark was near. But always timed with the moment someone said something they never had the courage to say before. I don't want to be quiet. It wasn't my fault. I deserve to be heard. I am still here. I am not wrong for speaking. These words, small and huge, brave and broken, joined the thousands already whispered into Lami's flame. The shrine became a pilgrimage site not for worshippers but for the wounded, survivors, truth-tellers, the once silenced. No gods needed, only honesty. And the children. Always the children. They drew pictures of her. Not just the fire. Not just the scream. But her smile. Her strength. Her eyes. They painted her walking through flames barefoot, holding hands with other girls. They painted her sitting with elders, her voice wrapped around them like warmth. One child drew her as a tree, her branches full of mouths. Because she grew more voices, the child explained. She didn't stay one. Even in lands that had never heard her name, her story echoed. When people stood up and said things that cracked silence like bone, others would murmur, that was a Lami voice. Some wore pendants of flame. Some carved her name on stones and placed them in gardens. Some taught their daughters to speak not first, but loudest when no one else would. And always in the darkest rooms, where pain once lived and secrets once festered, a candle would be lit. A breath would be taken. A truth would be spoken. And the wind would answer, I hear you. Not because Lami had returned, but because she never left. She had simply scattered, like ash, like song, like voice, into the lungs of a world that needed to remember what fire felt like. Not to destroy, but to illuminate, to warm the cold spaces, to chase away the dark. Her voice still burns. Not in anger, but in remembrance. Ask ChatGPT.